Every court keeps records. The Romans were among the most meticulous record keepers in the ancient world. Their legal proceedings were documented. Their governors filed reports to Rome. Their courts produced transcripts. The administrative machinery of the Roman Empire ran on paperwork. And the most significant trial in the history of the world, the trial of Jesus of Nazareth before Pontius Pilate, governor of Judea, would have produced a record, a Roman court document, an official account of the proceedings, the witnesses, the charges, the verdict and the execution. That record, if it ever existed, has never been found. But an ancient text claims to be exactly that. The Acts of Pilate, also known as the Gospel of Nicodemus, purports to be the official court record of Jesus' trial. Written in the 1st century, preserved in Latin, Greek, Coptic, Armenian, Syriac, and a dozen other ancient languages, known to the early church fathers, who debated its authenticity with extraordinary intensity. And what it describes inside Pilate's courtroom, the witnesses who testified, the miracles the court could not explain, the moment the Roman military standards bowed before Jesus without any human hand touching them, the Jewish leaders who dared to speak in his defense, is unlike anything in the 4 canonical Gospels. But what no one knew was that the Gospel of Nicodemus does not end with the trial. It contains a 2nd section, the descent into hell, that describes what happened between the crucifixion and the resurrection. In the realm of the dead, with Adam and Eve, and the patriarchs waiting, and the moment when the gates of death were broken open from the outside. Welcome to the Journey Bible Stories. Subscribe right now. Today we read the lost court record of the most important trial in history, and what we find will change how you read the passion narratives of the 4 Gospels forever. Let's begin. The Gospel of Nicodemus is a composite text, 2 distinct documents that were combined at some point in antiquity into a single work. Understanding its structure is essential to understanding what it claims and what scholars make of those claims. The first part, the Acts of Pilate, is the older and more historically significant portion. It claims to be a record of the trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. It was known to the early church as early as the 2nd century. Justin Martyr, writing his first apology around 150 AD, explicitly appeals to the Acts of Pilate as a document that his pagan readers could consult to verify the details of Jesus' crucifixion. He says, "You can read the record of what happened under Pilate in the Acts which were filed under Pontius Pilate." Justin Martyr believed such a record existed. Whether the document we have today is that record or a later composition claiming to be that record is the central scholarly debate. The second part, the descent into hell, or descensus ad inferna, is generally dated later. It describes what happened in Hades between the crucifixion and the resurrection. It was the basis for the phrase in the Apostles' Creed, "He descended into hell." That phrase's inclusion in the Creed reflects the widespread acceptance of this tradition in early Christianity. The complete Gospel of Nicodemus, as it circulated in the medieval church, combined both sections into a single document. It was enormously popular. Hundreds of manuscripts survive in multiple languages. It was read, cited, illustrated in art, and dramatized in medieval passion plays across Europe. But what no one knew was the specific reason for its exclusion from the canon, not because the early church considered it dangerous, because it could not be verified as apostolic. Its connection to the apostle Nicodemus, the Pharisee who came to Jesus by night in John 3, cannot be established, and without apostolic authority, the document could not be included in the authoritative scripture. It survived outside the canon, preserved in libraries and monasteries, read by millions of Christians across 15 centuries, and almost entirely unknown to modern believers. To evaluate the Gospel of Nicodemus as a historical document, we need to understand what we independently know about Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor at the center of its narrative. For most of Christian history, Pilate was known almost entirely through the Gospel accounts. But in 1961, a remarkable archaeological discovery transformed the scholarly discussion. Italian archaeologists excavating the ancient theatre at Caesarea Maritima, Pilate's administrative headquarters, found a limestone block, inscribed on it in Latin, a dedication by Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, to the Emperor Tiberius. The Pilate stone, the first physical archaeological confirmation that Pontius Pilate was a real historical figure who held the title the Gospels give him, prefect of Judea, in Caesarea, in the period corresponding to Jesus' ministry. The Jewish historian Philo of Alexandria, writing in the 1st century, describes Pilate in terms that are remarkably consistent with the Gospel of Nicodemus. Philo calls him inflexible, merciless, and obstinate, a man given to corruption, insults, robberies, outrages, wanton injuries, executions without trial, and the endless and intolerable cruelties. But the Gospel of Nicodemus presents a more nuanced Pilate, a man who is genuinely uncertain about Jesus' guilt, who is privately convinced of his innocence, who is being maneuvered by the Jewish leadership into a verdict he does not want to give, who washes his hands in a public gesture of disavowal. And what no one knew was how consistent this portrait of Pilate is with what we know from independent sources. The Roman system of provincial governance created exactly the pressures the Gospel of Nicodemus describes. A governor balancing Roman administrative requirements with local political management, walking the tightrope between keeping the peace and maintaining justice. Pilate was real. His dilemma was real. The question is whether the document claiming to record his proceedings is genuine. The Gospel of Nicodemus opens with the formal accusation against Jesus, and the detail it provides about the specific charges, the specific accusers, and the specific legal procedures is one of the strongest arguments for the document's connection to genuine court proceedings. Acts of Pilate 1.1. The chief priests and scribes gathered in assembly, Annas and Caiaphas named explicitly, along with a list of other accusers including Judas, Levi, Nephthalim, Alexander, and Jairus. They bring Jesus before Pilate. The charges they bring are specific and legally structured. First, he perverts our nation and forbids giving tribute to Caesar. Second, he calls himself king. Third, he says he is the Son of God and a king. These are political charges, carefully constructed to make Jesus a threat to Roman authority rather than simply a religious offender. Pilate would not care about internal Jewish theological disputes, but a man claiming to be king, challenging the authority of Caesar, that was a matter for Rome. The Gospel of Nicodemus records Pilate's immediate response. I find no offense in this man. He examines the charges and dismisses them. Jesus has not forbidden tribute to Caesar. The canonical Gospels confirm this. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. The claim to kingship is of a different kind than political rebellion. But what no one knew was the specific legal maneuver that the Gospel of Nicodemus adds. When Pilate declares Jesus innocent and the accusers press harder, Pilate calls witnesses. He asks, "Who among you has evidence against this man?" And the witnesses who come forward in the Gospel of Nicodemus are not enemies of Jesus. They are people Jesus has healed. The blind man he gave sight to, the lame man he caused to walk, the woman with the flow of blood, the man born blind whose healing is described in John 9. The healings that the canonical Gospels describe as miracles of compassion become in the Gospel of Nicodemus evidence in a court of law, presented by the healed people themselves, witnessed by the court, unable to be explained by the accusers. Acts of Pilate 6-8. The defense witnesses come forward, and what they say in this ancient text is a catalogue of miracles confirmed under oath in a Roman court of law. A man named Verniclas, a woman in some manuscripts, presents the cloth on which the image of Jesus' face was miraculously imprinted when she wiped his face on the road to Calvary. The Veronica tradition, presented as physical evidence before Pilate. Nicodemus himself, the Pharisee of John 3, the man who came to Jesus by night, speaks in Jesus' defense. He says, "I ask these elders and priests and Levites to say before you what the signs are that you say he does, whether they are against God's law." The Pharisee who first came to Jesus secretly, now speaking openly in the Roman court, at risk to his own position and safety. And a group of men come forward, 12 men who declare, "We were present at the espousal of Mary and Joseph. We know his family. We know his origin. We know the signs that attended his birth." The witnesses for the defense represent the full sweep of Jesus' ministry: the healed blind man, the woman with the flow of blood, the man who carried his mat, people whose lives had been transformed, testifying under oath before the Roman governor that this man had done what the canonical Gospels describe. But what no one knew was the specific response of the accusers to these witnesses. They cannot contradict the testimonies. They cannot produce counter-witnesses who saw the same events and came to different conclusions. They cannot deny that the healings happened. So they resort to the only argument available: his power comes from Beelzebul, the prince of demons. He casts out demons by the prince of demons. The canonical Gospels record the same accusation. Matthew 12:24. The Gospel of Nicodemus places it in its proper legal context. It is a last resort, an argument made not because it is persuasive, but because no other argument is available against the weight of testimony. Acts of Pilate 1:5-6, one of the most extraordinary scenes in the entire Gospel of Nicodemus, and one that has no parallel in the canonical Gospels. When Jesus is brought into the Praetorium, Pilate's judgment hall, the soldiers are carrying the Roman military standards. The signa, the poles topped with the eagle of Rome and the images of the emperor, the most sacred symbols of Roman military authority, standards that soldiers were required to honor with religious veneration, standards that had never been voluntarily lowered before any person except the emperor himself. As Jesus enters, the standards bow. The eagles and the imperial images incline themselves toward Jesus as he passes. The standard bearers are horrified. They struggle to hold the standards upright. They cannot. The standards bow despite every human effort to keep them erect. Pilate is furious. He assumes the soldiers deliberately lowered the standards as an insult. He commands that stronger soldiers hold them. 12 men, the strongest soldiers available, take the standards. And when Jesus passes before them again, the standards bow again. Pilate interrogates the soldiers. They swear they did not lower the standards intentionally. The standards moved of their own accord in the presence of this man. But what no one knew was the specific theological statement this scene makes in its Roman legal context. The Roman eagle, the symbol of the empire's divine authority, bows before Jesus in the Praetorium, not in a synagogue, not on a mountain, in Pilate's own court, before the eyes of the Roman governor and his soldiers. The empire that will condemn Jesus, its own sacred symbols declare his sovereignty before the verdict is given. The canon Gospels describe the centurion at the cross saying, "Truly, this was the Son of God." The Gospel of Nicodemus describes the standards making the same declaration before the trial even begins. While Pilate is still asking questions, while the verdict is still undecided, the Roman Empire testified to what the Roman court refused to acknowledge. Acts of Pilate 3. Pilate takes Jesus into his private chambers, away from the accusers, away from the crowd, away from the political pressure. He wants to speak with Jesus alone. And what passes between them, in this ancient text, is one of the most theologically charged private conversations in all of ancient literature. Pilate asks, "What is truth?" This is identical to John 18:38. The canonical Gospel preserves this question. What is truth? But the Gospel of Nicodemus extends the conversation. Jesus answers. He says, "Truth is from heaven, from the eternal God." Truth is not something that earth dwellers possess of themselves. It comes from above. Pilate presses, "And is there no truth on earth?" Jesus says, "You see how those who speak truth are judged by those who have earthly authority. You see how those who speak truth are judged." Jesus, facing execution for speaking truth, tells the Roman governor that this is the pattern. Truth speakers are judged by earthly power. It has always been so. He is not the exception. He is the clearest example of the rule. And then Pilate goes back out to the accusers and says, "I find no fault in this man." But what no one knew was the specific personal dimension of this exchange. Pilate is not simply a political actor calculating his options. In the Gospel of Nicodemus, he is a man genuinely troubled by what he sees before him. His wife has warned him, Matthew 27:19, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man." He has examined Jesus privately. He has heard the answer to his question about truth. And he still condemns him because the crowd is too loud, because the political risk is too great, because truth, in Pilate's estimation, is ultimately less important than peace. The governor who asked, "What is truth?" answered his own question with his verdict. Truth is what you sacrifice when preserving your position matters more. Acts of Pilate 9. The condemnation, and the Gospel of Nicodemus records it with a specificity that the canonical accounts do not provide. The Jewish leaders press their final argument. They say to Pilate, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." This is the argument that breaks Pilate's resistance. Not theological, not legal, political. You are not Caesar's friend. Pilate knows the implication. A complaint to Rome, a report that he released a man claiming to be king of the Jews. His career, already under pressure, would not survive it. Acts of Pilate 9:4. Pilate takes water and washes his hands before the multitude. The canonical parallel, Matthew 27:24. But the Gospel of Nicodemus adds Pilate's words, "I am innocent of the blood of this righteous man, not this criminal, not this man whose guilt I am uncertain of, this righteous man." Pilate declares Jesus righteous in the same breath that he condemns him. The Jewish leaders respond, in the Gospel of Nicodemus, as in Matthew 27:25, "His blood be on us and on our children." But what no one knew was the specific aftermath the Gospel of Nicodemus records. After the condemnation, after the crowd has taken Jesus away, Pilate sits alone in his judgment hall. The standards that bowed are still standing around him. The testimony of the witnesses is still fresh in his mind. The private conversation about truth still echoes. And he summons Nicodemus, the Pharisee who spoke for Jesus in the court, and he asks him, "What do you make of this man?" Nicodemus says, "I told you before, and I tell you now, he is from God. And those who did not listen will answer for it." And Pilate says nothing. The silence of a man who knew the truth and chose otherwise. The second part of the Gospel of Nicodemus, the descent into hell, is the section that had the most profound influence on Christian theology and culture in the medieval period. And it describes events that the canonical Gospels mention only in passing. 1 Peter 3:19, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Ephesians 4:9, he descended into the lower regions of the earth. The canonical texts gesture toward something that happened between the crucifixion and the resurrection, something in the realm of the dead, something involving proclamation to spirits. The Gospel of Nicodemus fills in this gap with extraordinary dramatic intensity. The descent opens with two men, Carinus and Lucius, sons of the aged Simeon of Luke, 2:25-35, who were among the dead raised when Jesus rose, Matthew 27-52-53. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. These two men are brought before the Jewish leaders who demand to know what happened in Hades, and they tell what they witnessed in the realm of the dead between the crucifixion and the resurrection. But what no one knew was the theological architecture of what they describe. In Hades, according to this ancient text, the patriarchs and prophets and righteous people of the Old Testament were waiting, not in torment, in a kind of expectant darkness, waiting for the fulfillment of a promise that had been made again and again throughout their lifetimes. Isaiah had prophesied it, David had prophesied it, the patriarchs had believed it. The Messiah would come, even to the realm of the dead, even to the place where death had imprisoned the righteous, and then a great light appears. The descent into hell reaches its climax in a scene that became one of the most depicted moments in all of medieval Christian art, and that preserves a theological tradition of extraordinary antiquity. Gospel of Nicodemus, Descensus 1:2. The patriarchs and prophets are gathered in the darkness of Hades. Adam, the first man, Seth, his son, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Moses and David and Isaiah, John the Baptist, the last of the prophets, recently arrived, still fresh from his beheading, all of them waiting, and suddenly a great light shines in the darkness. The darkness that has held the righteous dead since the beginning of time is pierced by something it has never encountered. The voice of John the Baptist rings out, "This is the one I was sent to prepare the way for. He is coming, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And then a voice from outside, from above, outside the gates of Hades. Psalm 24 rings out, "Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." The gates of death refuse. Who is this King of glory? The voice answers, "The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle." The gates shudder, the bars of iron crack, the locks break, and the gates of Hades that have held every human being since Adam's death, that have imprisoned the righteous alongside the unrighteous, that death itself has maintained against every assault, fall open, and Jesus enters. But what no one knew was what happens at the moment of entry. Satan and Hades, personified in this text as its keeper, argue over what is happening. Satan says, "I made this man suffer. I worked through Judas. I provoked the chief priests. I arranged his crucifixion." Hades responds, "Why did you bring this one here? He is too powerful. I cannot hold him. His resurrection will undo everything we have accomplished." The debate between Satan and death, the two powers that collaborated to put Jesus in Hades, over whether they can keep him there. And the answer to their debate is the sound of gates falling open and the light of the resurrection filling the realm of the dead. The descent into hell reaches its most theologically profound moment when Jesus reaches Adam, the first man, the father of the human race, the one whose choice in the garden set in motion everything that followed, including the cross that has just been planted on Golgotha. Gospel of Nicodemus, Descensus 8. Jesus goes to the patriarchs in Hades. He stretches out his hand to Adam, and he says, "Peace to you, Adam, and to all your children." Adam falls on his face. He weeps. He cries out, "I bless your divinity, Lord, for you have visited my lowliness." And Jesus raises him up, takes his hand, leads him out of Hades into the light. And then every patriarch, every prophet, every righteous person of the Old Testament follows. Isaiah, David, Habakkuk, Micah, Moses, Elijah, they all follow the procession out of the realm of death and into the light. And Elijah, the prophet who was taken to heaven in a fiery chariot without dying, who now appears in the realm of the dead, says, I also was taken up in a body into heaven, but I did not die. Nevertheless, I am here, and I rejoice with you all. And Enoch, taken by God before death like Elijah, is also there. But what no one knew was the specific theological completion that Adam's liberation represents in the context of the life of Adam and Eve. In that ancient text, which we explored in our previous video, Adam is promised the oil of mercy. The angel tells him it will come at the last day, at the resurrection. The Gospel of Nicodemus describes that promise being kept. Jesus enters Hades, finds Adam, takes his hand. The oil of mercy, promised to a dying man in Eden's shadow, flows at last, delivered personally by the one who is both the source of the oil and its bearer. Adam waited from Eden to Calvary, from the day the gate closed to the day the gates of Hades fell open. And the hand that reached down to raise him was the hand of the one Adam's story had always been pointing toward. The Gospel of Nicodemus was not a marginal or obscure text in early Christianity. It was widely known, widely read, and its traditions influenced the theology and practice of the Church in profound ways. Justin Martyr, 150 AD, appeals to the Acts of Pilate as a publicly available document that his readers can consult. This is the most significant early reference. Justin is writing to the Roman emperor, appealing to Roman records to substantiate the historical claims of Christianity. He would not have appealed to a document that did not exist or that was not known to be in some form available. Tertullian, around 200 AD, also references the official report that Pilate sent to Tiberius about Jesus. The tradition of a Pilatian report was ancient and widespread. Eusebius of Caesarea, the 4th century church historian, mentions that in the early 4th century the Emperor Maximin Dia had forged a set of Acts of Pilate, a document hostile to Christianity, and had it circulated in schools to discredit the faith. The existence of a forged hostile version of the Acts of Pilate presupposes the existence of an original pro-Christian version that it was designed to counteract. The Apostles' Creed, one of the oldest statements of Christian faith, includes the phrase, "descended into hell." This phrase reflects the descent tradition preserved in the second part of the Gospel of Nicodemus. The Creed's inclusion of this phrase demonstrates that the descent tradition was accepted as part of the core Christian narrative long before the medieval period. But what no one knew was the specific reason the early church did not include this text in the canon, despite knowing it. The answer is consistent with everything we have seen in the Hidden Book series: apostolicity. The text cannot be traced to an apostolic author. The claim that Nicodemus wrote it cannot be verified. And without apostolic authority, however useful and edifying the text might be, it cannot be canonical. Known, respected, used, but not canonical. The distinction the early church drew, and the distinction that has kept the text outside most believers' awareness ever since. Let us examine the historical consistency of the Gospel of Nicodemus, the places where its details align with what we independently know about the period. The Roman legal procedure described in the text is consistent with what we know about provincial trials in the Roman Empire. The role of the governor as judge, the right of the accused to face accusers, the calling of witnesses, the formal verdict. These details reflect genuine Roman legal practice. The political pressure on Pilate, the accusation that releasing Jesus would make him not Caesar's friend, is historically specific. The phrase amicus Caesaris, friend of Caesar, was a formal political title in Rome. Losing this status had serious career consequences. The accuser's use of this specific phrase is the kind of detail a genuine court record would contain, and the kind of detail a second-century forger might not know to include. The naming of specific Jewish leaders, Annas and Caiaphas, is consistent with the canonical Gospels and with what we know from Josephus and other sources about the Jewish leadership at the time. The healing testimonies, the blind man of John 9, the woman with the flow of blood of Mark 5, the man healed at the pool of Bethesda, are consistent with the canonical miracle accounts. The Gospel of Nicodemus adds court context to miracles that the canonical Gospels describe in narrative context. The miracles themselves are the same. But what no one knew was the specific detail that most strongly suggests a connection to genuine court proceedings. The naming of individual witnesses, Vaniclas, a man named Centurio, the 12 men who knew Mary and Joseph. Forged documents tend to be vague about names. Court records tend to be specific. The specificity of the Gospel of Nicodemus at these points is consistent with the claims it makes about its own origin. Does this prove it is the genuine ancient record? No. But it is consistent with that claim in ways that demand serious historical consideration. Intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the places where the Gospel of Nicodemus moves beyond historical probability into legendary elaboration. These are the elements that most strongly suggest later composition or later additions to an earlier core. The Veronica tradition, the miraculous imprint of Jesus' face on a cloth. This tradition appears in multiple forms in early Christianity. The Mandylion, the veil of Veronica, but has no canonical support and cannot be traced to a first-century source. Its presence in the Gospel of Nicodemus is one of the indicators that the text, as we have it, contains later legendary accretions. The extended dialogue between Satan and Hades in the descent section, while theologically rich and consistent with biblical themes, reads more like a theological drama than a court record. The personification of Hades as a speaking character engaging in extended argument with Satan belongs to a genre of theological speculation rather than historical testimony. The claim that Quirinus and Lucius, sons of Simeon, can write identical accounts of what they witnessed in Hades, and that each account miraculously says exactly the same words, reflects the genre of miracle story rather than historical witness. But what no one knew was how to properly evaluate these legendary elements. They do not necessarily discredit the entire document. Ancient texts routinely combined historical core material with legendary elaboration. The Gospel of Mark contains historical core material with interpretive additions. Every ancient biography contained elements that modern historiography would categorize differently from its historical claims. The presence of legendary elements in the Gospel of Nicodemus does not require us to dismiss its historical core. It requires us to read it carefully, distinguishing the material that has strong historical plausibility from the material that reflects later theological elaboration. The standards bowing, historically implausible, but theologically coherent. The private conversation with Pilate, historically plausible and consistent with what John 18 records. The descent into hell, theologically ancient and consistently attested, but not strictly historical in the modern sense, a mixed text, as most ancient documents are. The title Gospel of Nicodemus is medieval. The text was given this name in the Middle Ages, based on a medieval prologue attributing it to Nicodemus. But the figure of Nicodemus himself, the Pharisee who came to Jesus by night in John 3, is worth examining carefully, because his trajectory across the canonical Gospels is one of the most remarkable spiritual journeys in the New Testament. John 3, Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. He comes secretly and at night, when he would not be seen by his fellow Pharisees. He acknowledges that Jesus must be from God. He receives the teaching about being born again, and then he disappears from the narrative. John 7:45-52, Nicodemus reappears. The Pharisees are debating what to do about Jesus, and Nicodemus asks, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" His question is procedural, legal, not yet a declaration of faith, but a voice for justice in a room where everyone else wants a verdict before the trial. John 19:38-42. After the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea asks for Jesus' body. And who comes with him? Nicodemus, the man who came to Jesus by night. Now at the tomb in broad daylight, with 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes, a royal quantity of burial spices. His final appearance in the canonical text is his most public, most expensive, most conspicuous act of devotion. The trajectory is unmistakable. Night, half-light, full day, secrecy, legal caution, public devotion. The man who came to Jesus by night ends his canonical story anointing Jesus' body in the full sight of whoever was watching. But what no one knew was the logical conclusion that the Gospel of Nicodemus draws from this trajectory. If Nicodemus moved from secret inquirer to public defender of Jesus in the court of Pilate, as the Gospel of Nicodemus claims, it is entirely consistent with the character the canonical Gospels portray, a man moving steadily at great personal cost from darkness to light. The text may not be his, but the character it claims is consistent with the man John describes. The Gospel of Nicodemus, in both its sections, makes a specific and urgent argument for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the nature of that argument is different from the canonical gospel arguments, not contradicting them, but adding a legal and cosmic dimension that the canonical texts do not provide. The canonical resurrection arguments are based on testimony, empty tomb, post-resurrection appearances, the transformation of the disciples from frightened deserters to courageous witnesses, the conversion of Paul on the Damascus road. These are personal, experiential testimonies. The Gospel of Nicodemus adds two dimensions. First, legal testimony. The witnesses in Pilate's court who testified to Jesus' miracles, the healings that were confirmed under oath before the Roman governor by the people who experienced them. If the court record is genuine, the resurrection is attested not just by disciples who might be accused of bias, but by healed strangers who had nothing to gain from false testimony. Second, cosmic testimony. The descent into hell describes the liberation of the righteous dead, not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a historical event with historical witnesses. The two raised men who testify to what they saw in Hades. Their testimony is given before the Jewish authorities, people who would have every reason to dismiss it, and recorded. But what no one knew was the specific force of the descent testimony for understanding 1 Peter 3:19. He went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. This canonical verse has puzzled scholars for centuries. What exactly did Jesus proclaim? To whom? In what form? The Gospel of Nicodemus answers, he proclaimed liberation, he proclaimed victory, he proclaimed to every righteous person who had died before the cross that the promise is kept. The oil of mercy has arrived, the gates are open, come. The resurrection was not simply a personal event, it was a cosmic event. Its effects were not limited to the living. Its proclamation reached the dead. And Adam, the first man, the father of the fall, heard it first. We have read the court record of the most important trial in history. We have heard the witnesses who testified to Jesus' miracles under oath before a Roman governor. We have watched the standards bow. We have heard Pilate ask, "What is truth?" and then answer his own question with a cowardly verdict. We have descended into the realm of death and heard the gates fall open. And now, the question that matters most. What does it mean for you? The Gospel of Nicodemus is a text about testimony, about what happens when the truth about Jesus is presented to people with the power to act on it, and what they choose. The witnesses who came to court, the blind man, the woman with the flow of blood, the lame man, they testified at personal risk. Standing in the Roman praetorium, before the Jewish leaders who were trying to execute Jesus, declaring publicly what had been done for them, They could have stayed silent. Nobody forced them to come forward. They came because truth mattered more than safety. Pilate heard the testimony. He examined Jesus privately. He received the answer about truth. He declared Jesus innocent 3 times. And then, when the political pressure became intolerable, he washed his hands and condemned an innocent man. He chose safety over truth. But what no one knew was the most urgent personal question the Gospel of Nicodemus asks, not, was Jesus really the Son of God? The court answered that. The standards answered it. Adam answered it from the depths of Hades. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, what will you do with the evidence? Pilate had more evidence than most people ever receive. He was present. He asked the questions. He heard the answers. He saw the standards bow, and he chose not to act on what he knew. You are reading this, wherever you are, whatever your background, with access to 2,000 years of accumulated testimony about Jesus Christ. The canonical Gospels, the Church Fathers, the martyrs who died rather than deny what they had seen. The conversion of Paul, the empty tomb that nobody in first-century Jerusalem could produce a body to contradict. And now, one more ancient voice, testifying from outside the canon, in a language that was standard equipment in Roman courts. The trial has been recorded. The verdict of history is in, and the only question that remains, the only question that was always the real question, is the one Pilate asked and then refused to answer. What is truth? Truth is the one who stood before Pilate's court and let the standards bow for him when the soldiers could not hold them up. The one who descended into the realm of death and broke its gates open from the outside. The one who reached down and took Adam's hand and said, "Peace to you and to all your children." That is truth, and truth, unlike Pilate's verdict, does not wash away with water. The standards bowed. The witnesses testified. Pilate asked the right question and gave the wrong answer. The gates of Hades fell open, and Adam, the first man, dead for 4,000 years, heard his name called and felt a hand reach down. That is what the court record says, the ancient text, preserved in a dozen languages across 15 centuries, known to the early church, hidden from your Bible education. But the most important testimony, the one that no ancient document can provide and no court record can replace, is the testimony of the empty tomb, of a body that was never produced by people who had every reason to produce it, of disciples who died rather than recant what they had seen, of a movement that began not with a philosophy, but with a resurrection, witnessed, testified, preached at the cost of everything. The Gospel of Nicodemus adds detail to a story that is already true without it. It adds color to a canvas that is already complete. It gives legal weight to testimony that is already theologically sufficient. But what it cannot add, and what no ancient document can replace, is the personal encounter with the one who stood before Pilate's court and descended into death and rose again. That encounter is available. Not in a library, not in an ancient manuscript, not in a court record preserved in Latin and Greek and Coptic, in a relationship with the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, who asked the right question about truth 2,000 years before you were born, and answered it with his own resurrection. Subscribe to the Journey Bible Stories right now. Every week, the hidden things, the ancient records, and the God who needs no court to establish his identity. Drop one word in the comments. What did the Gospel of Nicodemus reveal to you? Share this with someone who has questions about the historical Jesus. Show them what the ancient court said, and show them that the evidence has always been there for those with eyes to see. See you in the next one.